Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope this video finds you in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. So if you will permit me, please let me continue with my brief discussion, sharing some comments that I have with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year, 2020. And next, I'd like to share with you some thoughts I have with respect to Spine number 1015. This is the film from 1955, and this is from the filmmaker Karel Zaman from the Criterion set called Three Fantastic Journeys by Karel Zaman. This is the film, the first film in the set. The original title in Czech is Cesta do Pravieku. In English, this is known as Journey to the Beginning of Time. (1955's) Journey to the Beginning of Time, Cesta do Pravieku, is one of those magical film journeys by the great artist and genius Karel Zaman. This film is so magical and wonderful and beautiful in terms of the many myriad delights that it has to present with respect to the travels through history made by these four young boys and their adventures through time is done in such a charming, simplistic way on the one hand, and yet on the other hand we are witness as viewers to some of the great, wondrous effects shots and spectacle shots and composed compositions of framing and visual style and the like to bring together animals and prehistoric dinosaurs and settings and worlds that are just a great, lovely depiction of a kind of historical past that once was but now is not. And yet through the magical medium that is cinema and animation and trick shots, photographic effects, and matte paintings and perspective shots and the like, Zaman and his crew present to us in loving detail, with such care and an eye for detail and a beautiful sense of scale and intimacy, this world and the journey of these four young boys, Petr, Tonik, Yenda, and Jurka, as they travel gradually down the path of history with a magical sort of boat ride that involves nothing except just the simple and charming explanation that they are traveling to periods of the past, from the Ice Age to the Tertiary era to the Mesozoic era, all the way down to the Carboniferous era and the Silurian era. So they go gradually from the present to many points in time in the past, all the way to the beginning of the creation of the world, in a sense. And so this is a fabulous journey, and along the way, of course, we are treated to some delightful and marvelous creature effects, the boys and their interactions with history, with certain animals and dinosaurs and other elements of nature that emerge. And these are things that are created within certain effects shots that Zaman designed and therefore initiated, and that are on screen for all to see and witness. And my goodness, to see all the care and love and true artistry and craft come together in the various types of shots that he prepares is, simply put, stunning and awe-inspiring. You see some of these special effects that are on screen, and on the one hand they seem to be so charming in their handmade quality on the one hand, and yet on the other hand they are so technically proficient, so wonderfully complex, that there are some moments that you think, my goodness, how did that happen? How did that happen? And so that's what I mean when I say seemingly simple. It seems simple, but that's the trick, because there is a magic that is happening with this journey through history and the way in which these animals and prehistoric dinosaurs and the like come to life in a vivid and, on the one hand, very approachable style, and yet on the other hand, a way that is truly enchanting and marvelous and magical. That is, in my view, in essence, the core and heart that belongs to this film, Cesta do Provieco, or Journey to the Beginning of Time. This is a beautiful, magical experience that hopefully you will enjoy as much as I, because this is a true delight, a really, really wonderful film to have in the Criterion collection. So, speaking of which, the Criterion collection release, as you know, comes in this 3-film set, which is 3 Fantastic Journeys by Karel Zaman, and it has its own spine number, 1015, and it comes like this. So it's the first film, and if we open it up, we see that it's sort of pop-up art, at least in this version that I have, with the sleeve that houses the disc. The disc at the moment is in a separate housing system, which I have, but this is the way in which the pop-up art for this particular film is presented. And then we have as well the essay, which is in this separate sort of fold-out, which is by Michael Atkinson. And Michael Atkinson gives a one continuous essay where he talks about each of the films in the set at various points in this essay. So in this essay, he will have a particular section that's devoted to his comments on Journey to the Beginning of Time. So this is a good read and well worth checking out if you haven't done so already. So what is on the Criterion disc? There's a lot to process with respect to what's on the disc. So first we have the film itself. And this is the 4K digital restoration of the film, and it's a wonderful image, a wonderful presentation and quality, so highly, highly worth checking that out. And then we have the US release version of the film Journey to the Beginning of Time, and this is a very interesting situation because the US release version is described as being assembled from the best available audio and visual elements by Derek Davis and the Criterion Collection. And when you see the US version, it has its own English track, so there's English dubbing going on. The characters' names are slightly changed to account for the US market to which this was tailored. There's a slightly different opening sequence to start the film, etc. So there's a kind of real wonderful sort of potential area for comparative analysis between the US version and the original language version of the film. But both versions, I think, are really, really quite nice, especially if one is thinking of showing these films to maybe young children. Maybe young children might be interested in watching this film in terms of seeing the spectacle and the dinosaurs moving around and all that fun stuff. And so sometimes it's good, of course, to show the film in the original language, but other times, of course, there is a benefit to showing films in, say, an English dubbed version, and I think this is one of those times. And therefore I don't think that the U.S. Release version or the English dub version is necessarily inferior to the original language version. Of course, for me personally, I would lean slightly towards the original language version in terms of the opening and the actual language used, etc. That I would prefer myself. But I can see both versions being seen and being equally appreciated. So therefore, I think the inclusion of this is really well worth it. So that's the U.S. release version, as assembled by Derek Davis in the Criterion collection. And there's an important point about the U.S. release version that I will talk about momentarily when compared to the second run release of this. It's very important. But getting back to the Criterion release, so there's that. Then we have what are known as the very short museum documentaries. And what this refers to is there is of course the Karel Zaman Museum in Prague, and they have made and produced a number of short documentaries on various topics regarding Karel Zaman and regarding the films that are included in this set. And so what we have on the disc for Journey to the Beginning of Time, we have the museum documentary called Birth of a Film Legend, which features footage from that is Karel Zaman and also Zaman's daughter, Ludmila Zaman, or she's referred to in the documentaries as Ludmila Zemanova. And then we have someone who worked on the crew, worked closely with Zaman. His name is Karel Hutečka. And so you see them speaking about the early beginnings of Zaman and his career, and it's very fascinating stuff. And then the second museum documentary is called Why Zaman Made the Film. And this is, we get clips of Zaman himself talking about what he wanted to accomplish with respect to this film, a scale of nature, and the idea of traveling back into the past. And we also hear more comments from Hutečka and also from Ludmila Zemanova about other possible influences and how Zaman might have been influenced by certain prehistoric paintings of prehistoric past. Burian is referred to as well, so that's a very interesting documentary to watch. Then the third museum documentary is called Where the Film Was Shot, and this is interesting too because this talks about certain locations, not all of the locations, but some of the locations, and we actually have featured in the documentary the actor Zdeněk Hustak, who plays one of the young boys. He plays Yenda, and we see him actually speak, and we also see him going to one of the locations, which is a very fascinating look at how palpable and real life the works of Zaman, and in particular this particular film, is. It's absolutely mesmerizing stuff. And then the fourth documentary is called Special Effects Techniques, and we have a description of some of the techniques that Zaman, employed in this film. So in-camera matte shots, then special effects using matte paintings, and then special effects using models. So we see little examples of each of these groupings. Again, fascinating stuff. And then the fifth short documentary, is a restoration demonstration, which is going into details about the restoration of this film and this painstaking detail that went into it. I like the little conceit of this documentary too. It's borrowing the conceit of using the journal, the book of Petr at the beginning, and using that as a kind of conceit to say that, like the boys in the film, the people who were on the crew responsible for the restoration of the film are also in a way kind of like explorers trying to dig into the past and trying to put together things about the past. Absolutely riveting stuff. And so these are the museum documentaries that are included. And then to round out the supplements, we have the inclusion of the restoration trailer, which is included here. Again, it's good to watch, and it's a really nice trailer to present and to introduce what this film is about. And then we have what is a Criterion supplement, a new supplement, which is an interview, a one-on-one interview with filmmaker John Stevenson. And in this interview, he describes his great admiration and love for the works of Zaman, and in particular Journey to the Beginning of Time and others. But this is a Criterion-produced supplement, as I say, and it's really quite beautiful to hear his comments and to hear those little details of particular Zaman works, and to hear his reasoning as to why he strongly and deeply appreciates the artistry and craft of Zaman as he does, not only as a fellow animator as well, but also as a filmmaker, because the point of, I think, the supplements of the set in general is to try to emphasize the fact that Zaman, he was a great animator, and he was a great conjurer of imaginative set pieces that were animated, of course. But alongside that, he was also a brilliant filmmaker who put ideas to film in ways that were so wholly unique to the landscape of cinema that they were just truly magnificent to behold. And I think the John Stevenson interview helps to solidify and highlight that fact with great effect. So it's very highly recommended, the John Stevenson interview talking about Carl Zaman's work. Now I'd like to just mention very briefly the second run Blu-ray, the region-free Blu-ray that was released sometime a little bit before the Criterion release. So they're not quite contemporaneous, but this came a little bit first, and then this came afterwards. But it's nice to have a little bit of a comparison to see what it is you're getting with the Criterion set versus what it is you're getting with the single release from second run. I should say from the outset that the second run Blu-ray is just great. It's absolutely brilliant. And if you are looking for if you're looking for the Carl Zaman film Journey to the Beginning of Time in a single release edition, and you don't necessarily want to get the full 3-film set from the Criterion collection, this is a great alternative. As I say, this is a region-free Blu-ray, so it's indicated as being ABC on the back, and so you should be able to play it on any region player in one of those regions, I'm assuming. So, for instance, I have no problem playing this on my Japanese Blu-ray player here in Tokyo, so it's really great. Now, what about the presentation and what about the supplements? How do they compare with the Criterion collection? So based on my understanding, we do have on the second run disc, we have an interview with the same John Stevenson, and it's here. It's a different interview though. It was filmed earlier, and it was filmed, it's a little bit longer than the Criterion interview. He goes over similar terrain in terms of his discussion of Zaman, but there's a little bit of, I would say, a little bit more detail that he gives in the second run interview versus the Criterion interview. They're both very fine interviews with the same person, of course, but they do speak to, there's a slight level of detail that we get with the Blu-ray for second run that is not necessarily in the Criterion interview, but the general vein of what he's talking about, I would say, is consistent. And so if you want to have both interviews, you can get both sets, or if you're looking for a nice interview which with detail, I would recommend getting the second run Blu-ray, although the Criterion interview is still so splendid. So I both are fine, but this has just a little bit more detail to it because of its length and the like. But there's that. Then we have museum documentaries. And the museum documentaries are the same as the ones that we saw here. They're in a slightly different order, and in fact the museum documentaries are sort of scattered about throughout the films, the discs here in the Criterion collection, and they're in fact scattered about in the other Zaman film releases from the second run. So we have Invention for Destruction and then Fabulous Baron Munchausen. So this is to say that, for example, the museum documentaries found on the Criterion disc for Journey to the Beginning of Time that are why Zaman made the film, where the film was shot, and the special effects techniques, and the restoration demonstration. These are all found on the second run disc of Journey to the Beginning of Time. The only Criterion included museum documentary that's found on the Journey to the Beginning of Time disc here, that's not found on the second run Blu-ray, is the documentary called Birth of a Film Legend. But that documentary, Birth of a Film Legend, will be found on the Fabulous Baron Munchausen Blu-ray from second run, and I'll talk about that later. So in essence, you are getting more or less the same stuff, but it is sort of presented in a different way. Also, I should say that the way that those documentaries, the museum documentaries, are presented it's a slightly different presentation, although the contents are the same. So what I said earlier about this documentary is included here, this documentary is included here, this documentary is included here, etc. Those documentaries, the contents are the same, but they are presented in the second run Blu-ray in the form of one kind of long documentary. When I say long, it's about 10 minutes or so, called The Making of Journey to the Beginning of Time. So there's in fact a supplement which is described as being a documentary called Making of Journey to the Beginning of Time, but that documentary actually consists of some of the museum documentaries that we find on the Criterion disc of the same film. So in fact, it's the same documentaries. They're just following one after the other, and it's just given the general supplement title, Making of Journey to the Beginning of Time. So, but you're getting the actual same contents that you would find on the Criterion disc, if that makes sense. So there's that. What is also included is a restoration trailer, which we also found on the Criterion disc. But we also have the trailer for the US version of the film, which we didn't get on the Criterion disc. So that's an interesting extra that we don't get on the Criterion disc. There's also an image gallery, one of those image galleries where you go through and press the forward button to proceed through the various pictures that are included, and that is not included in the Criterion Collection disc. It's a really nice, a great image gallery presentation, so I highly recommend it. And then there is a Karel Zaman museum promo, which is a very short trailer for the museum itself. That is not included on the disc of the Criterion Collection for Journey to the Beginning of Time, but that little promo, which is included on the second run Blu-ray here, is included on the Fabulous Baron Munchausen disc, which is included in the Criterion Collection. So you are getting that same promo. It's just going to be found in another part of the Criterion set. Okay, now let's get to okay, and there's one other thing which is really important. This has a really great essay in the booklet, which is by Michael Brook. Now, Michael Brook's essay here is just packed with information. It's so beautifully just dense with material, and his discussion goes into so much detail about this film. I think this is one of the best essays, and it's I think this Blu-ray from Second Run, one of its strengths is the Brooke essay. So if you have this, or if you're interested in getting a good presentation, you are getting a really great booklet with a very long essay by Michael Brooke. Very, very strongly recommended if you have the chance to read it. And then we should talk about the US version. Okay, so if you recall, I mentioned that the US version of this film, Journey to the Beginning of Time, is included as a supplement on the Criterion disc of Journey to the Beginning of Time. That US version is also included as a supplement to the second run Blu-ray release of Journey to the Beginning of Time. So on paper, it might seem like you are getting the same supplement carried over through both versions. And of course, you'd be very reasonable to think that. But upon close inspection, one finds that, in fact, what it appears to be is that the US version of the film, which is found as a supplement on the second run Blu-ray, is of a quality that is slightly different than the quality of the US version that is found on the Criterion release. This is very interesting because my understanding through anecdotal information is that when this Blu-ray was released, some years back, the materials and source materials that were used to sort of assemble this version of the U.S. version that would then be included as a supplement here. This version by Derek Davis and his crew was assembled from at the time, the best available materials. But my understanding is subsequent to this release, there were other materials that were discovered of the US version that were of slightly better quality image-wise. And so those were then relied upon, my understanding is, those were then relied upon for the Criterion release that included the supplement, the US version as a supplement. Therefore, if you look closely, the US version as it appears on the second run Blu-ray has a slight I don't want to use the word inferiority, but there is a noticeable difference in quality when you compare it with the Criterion US version. The Criterion US version is it's although it's not a perfect presentation, it is a very beautiful one when compared to the second run Blu-ray release. The second run Blu-ray release is still very, very good. Please don't get me wrong. It's not a terrible US version release. On the contrary, it is very, very good. But my understanding is that the materials relied upon to assemble the release to be included for the Criterion version were of better quality. Some of them were anyway. And so you are getting an overall higher quality visual presentation of the US release with the Criterion disc than you are with the second run Blu-ray, even though the second run Blu-ray is still a very good presentation of the US release. So that is why when you look at the menu and you click on the menu US version for Journey to the Beginning of Time, you'll get a little message saying, assembled from the best available audio and visual elements by Derek Davis and the Criterion Collection. So it says that Criterion Collection participated in some way, or it suggests that it participated in some way in collaboration with Derek Davis to create what they describe as being a composite restoration. This is very interesting, and if one is seeking a really great quality version of the US restoration, or the US version, my guess is that the Criterion presentation of the US version is the one to go for. Although, as I say again, I must reemphasize that the second run Blu-ray presentation of the US version is still very, very good. So it's really up to you which one you want to go for. If you're really looking for the best possible quality of that particular version, your best bet is to go with the Criterion Collection. Although, if you still want the version, but you don't necessarily mind that as long as it's really, really good quality, it might not necessarily be the best, but it's still very, very good. You can go with the second run and you can be okay, and rest assured that you have a very good version of the film, the US version anyway. I am not an expert when it comes to restoration and assembly and the like, but it's as a casual viewer and a consumer of these products, one can tell that there is a little bit of a difference. But also in terms of differences, there are differences in terms of the subtitling. The subtitling for the film itself is for the original language film version. The subtitling that's given on the second run Blu-ray is slightly different than the subtitling that's given for the original language version as presented by the Criterion Collection. Now, I am not a speaker of the Czech language, and so I can't tell which is more accurate. The differences in the subtitling, my sense is that they are very slight differences, so they don't necessarily go off into very different territories to create what might possibly be different interpretations of the same single scene. So I don't think it goes that far. But there are subtle differences in the way certain phrases are used, certain wordings are employed, etc., that I think might... it might be a very interesting thing to try to compare the two versions if you are so interested in that kind of comparative analysis. But my sense is that either version is quite serviceable in terms of the subtitling. Again, that's just based on my own intuitive hunch and my own just general sense. Not necessarily knowing how to speak Czech, of course, but just my general sense as a viewer of this. And so I don't think you would go wrong relying on either the second run Blu-ray original language version or the Criterion Blu-ray original language version. I think either one is of course, very, very serviceable when it comes to the subtitling. So with that, my friends, that is my general overview as far as the comparing and contrasting of the two versions of this particular film anyway is concerned. So it's really up to you which one you want to get, what items are more important to you. If you want to get the wealth of information that's presented in the Michael Brook essay, or if you want to get the film in a single release version that is playable on many different regions around the world on Blu-rays, your best bet is probably with the second run Blu-ray. But if you want to get the film, which is at the moment anyway included in this set, but you would still get a slightly better quality version of the US release, as well as a really nice interview with filmmaker Stevenson. Although you get a different but still very great interview with Stevenson on the second run Blu-ray, as well as getting the other films in the Zaman set with this complete package, then your best bet is probably to go with the Criterion Collection release. But then again, it's up to you. There's a certain price difference, of course, in terms of a single release versus a set release. This Criterion release, I understand, is region A. So that is something to consider. This second run Blu-ray is multi-region, so that is another element to consider. But it's really up to you what you prefer and what your own particular needs are as a consumer of these particular kinds of products. So there is, in essence, just a rundown of these two releases from different companies. Both, though, have their great merits, and either one, in my opinion, you can't go wrong. You won't go wrong with either one. In particular, when we realize the fact that you are getting one of those great magical films from the 1950s, from the great artist Zaman. That is the film Journey to the Beginning of Time, Cesta do Pravieku. So that's it for now, my friends. So if you have any thoughts or comments about this film or about any of these releases, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. As always, it'll be my pleasure to hear what it is you have to say. So that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Until we meet again, my friends, thank you and cheers.